this evening to continue to see the hand of God at work. Brother Paul's been looking at the hand of God working in the nation of Israel, and we now want to, just as it were, move back a little bit and look at God's hand working among the nations. And what we want to look at is how God is drawing Gog, Russia and Europe into the land of Israel. And we can see the steps that Gog is taking in preparation for his domination of the Middle East. And what a privilege and a blessing it is that with the Bible in hand we can see God's hand working behind the scenes. We know how busy the angels are. We're aware of the angels working in our lives really only through hindsight, and we can look back and think, well, that was the hand of God working in my life. And these same angels, brothers and sisters, are working among the nations, pushing them and pulling them and moving them into their right place, so that at the right time the events, as God has foretold, come to pass. And very often it is difficult to see the hand of God. There are so many events happening, but as we get closer to the time of the end, I'm sure we can all be thrilled to think, well, yes, that's exactly what God said. We can see it coming to pass before our eyes. And although God knows what is going to happen, it doesn't mean that the events are automatically going to drop into place. The angels have to perform God's will in manipulating the nations so that they go God's way. And as it were, the curtain is just drawn back on the work of the angels in an incident given us in Daniel chapter 10, where Daniel was told by Gabriel that the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. And so we get this little glimpse of the angels having to work quite hard in this situation to bring about a change of heart in the king of Persia, so the king of Persia would do that which God wished. And we have to learn to experience God's hand in our lives. We might not necessarily like the results, but we have to learn that God's will has to be done. It's his purpose that is being worked out. And we have to submit to his will and trust that he knows best. And one day, that glorious day of the kingdom will come. The Lord Jesus will be revealed with mighty power to raise the dead and to gather the saints and to prepare them for that great work which we look forward to so earnestly. And in that day we know that God's name will be feared and adored to the ends of the earth. Now we're living in an age when men are fearful. Only 6 weeks ago, the hands on the doomsday clock were advanced to 3 minutes to midnight. Men see that we've moved from a period of peace and stability to a period of war and commotion. They're very fearful of what they see, the hand of Russia and Putin, and this, among many other things, has caused them to move that clock forward. And how thankful we are. We know there is to be a time of trouble. We know there is to be great difficulties. But we know God has a solution which doesn't even enter into men's hearts. They know nothing about what is about to break forth upon this earth. But in the mercy of God, through the pages of his scripture, we can be reassured that God really is in control, and that day of the kingdom will really come. Now, a couple of weeks after the advancement of the hands of the clock, there was another man speaking his vision of what he saw was going to come to pass. And that's George Friedman of Stratfor. Now, those of you who take the snippets will know that many times I quote from Stratfor, and many of the articles are indeed written by George Friedman. He was giving this fascinating talk. Just Google Europe destined for conflict and listen to how he saw events unfolding. Now, this man is a Jew. His parents, grandparents, his family came from Hungary. They suffered dreadfully in World War I. In World War II, the family were incarcerated in camps, but they all came out as family. And, of course, living in Hungary, they found themselves in the Soviet Empire. And when George Friedman was only 6 months old, his parents decided to escape. He was drugged so that he wouldn't cry, and his parents had this raft, and he and his 11-year-old sister, and his mum and dad went across the Danube on this raft, dodging the spotlights and the machine guns which were manned at the towers, and managed successfully to cross the Danube into Czechoslovakia, and from there they went to America. He painted a picture which I found quite fascinating. He saw Europe having gone through a time of peace and prosperity. He sketched the early history of Europe, how it was a place of great conflict. In fact, he said, wherever you look in Europe, there is conflict. We Hungarians hated the Romanians hated us. The Scots want to break away. The Catalan want to divide from Spain. This is Europe all over. There are ethnic divisions. And the things that happened from First World War to the end of the Second World War was something which changed the psyche of Europe. During that time, 100 million perished from 1914 to 1945. He said 100 million Europeans perished in the wars, in the conflicts between, in the mass starvations, and all the purges and the terrorism. And this gave impetus to Europe wanting a time of peace. And he puts the beginning of that time of peace as being in 1992. For some reason we don't want to advance. In 1992, the Maastricht Treaty was signed. And that promised peace and prosperity. And that was 1992 was just the time when the Soviet collapsed. And he said that from 1992 there was this period of great peace. There were the ethnic divisions, but they were put on one side because of the greater good of prosperity. And that period lasted 16 years. And he puts the time of the ending of that time of peace and prosperity, for some reason it's not wanting to advance, to 2008. And in 2008, he says, in 7 weeks, the whole structure of not only Europe but the world changed. And the two events that he said that 7 weeks apart were Russia invading Georgia at the time of the Olympic Games, when everybody's eyes were attached to or looking at Beijing, and then 7 weeks later the Lehman Brothers collapsed. And those two totally different events, one a political one and one an economic one, changed the whole dynamics. And since then, Europe as we know it has unravelled. Europe was built around the needs of Germany. Germany was a country that exported 50% of everything it made, of nations involving Israel and other nations. So let's just put the dragon, the beast and the false prophet up on there. But down in the south here, then Israel and Egypt, which we know are the two countries that are at the centre of Gog's invasion. He first of all takes Egypt and then comes up and takes Israel. But today we're seeing this realignment of the nations, and the moderate nations, and Britain more and more being driven back there through trade. We're seeing great changes, and this is in accordance with the word of God. The angels have worked so hard, and the time has now come for these pieces of the jigsaw to reach their new alignments. And so we see Russia making plans for this day when East and West come together, and Iran is foremost among the companions, so a huge block of nations here prepared to come against the block of nations here who are opposed to such an invasion. In other words, these Arab nations are friendly to Israel in this day. And we see the beginnings of this great change. And so Putin, I think, already has mapped out his progress towards the domination of this region. This is what he wants, to have control of this region. This is where the energy is. And he is a very skilled man. This is a photoshopped picture of a real chess game, but with political leaders imposed upon the chess players. And Putin is playing a long-term game. He has his eyes set upon the Middle East, and we shall see how he is working there. Now, this has long-term been a goal of Russia to move southward. Way back in the time 1700s, the will of Peter the Great, he talks about we must keep steadily extending our frontiers northward along the Baltic and southward along the shores of the Black Sea. We must progress as much as possible in the direction of Constantinople and India. He who can get possession of these places is ruler of the world. And this is what his goal is. And we know that that aligns with Scripture. We know that in the latter days, the dragon is the representative of Russia, but in the latter days, the dragon power must be in possession of Constantinople. The dragon has to possess Constantinople, the beast system has Rome and other places there, in order for the old prophecies to reach their alignment. And so Russia is entering, and Europe is entering, this new phase. That period of peace and prosperity for Europe is over, ended in 2008. And we're now in this period of nations beating their swords into, beating their ploughshares into swords, aren't they? And the weak saying, let's be strong, let's band together and pool our powers. And Russia is being particularly militant, isn't it? And these are just some of the headlines, top two this week. Russia starts nationwide show of force. We'll look at that in a moment. Russia's military budget is somehow still growing. 25% increase in their military budget in spite of all that's happening. Russia's new Trojan horse strategy for breaking European unity. The new Cold War, Putin issues chilling new threat as NATO chief says tensions with Russia could end in all-out conflict. And the nations are worried that there is going to be great conflict. So this article just a couple of days ago, 4 days ago. Russia starts nationwide show of force. More than 45,000 Russian troops, as well as warplanes, submarines, started military exercises across much of the country on Monday in one of the Kremlin's biggest shows of force since its ties with the West plunged to Cold War lows. Putin called the Navy's northern fleet to full combat readiness, aimed at dwarfing the exercises by NATO in Norway. So Putin is not afraid to use his strength. He's in the mould of the excuse me. Is in the mould of the Assyrians of old. Shedding blood along the line to reach your objective is no drawback. Now, there was a report in the Sunday Telegraph, 22nd of February, which was by Christopher Booker. Anybody who has the Telegraph knows that he is one who is always looking at the weaknesses of the EU, showing up its inconsistencies. And he, in this article, he had this 3 EU dreams that have turned into nightmares. So just shut your eyes so you don't get shocked by this picture. But his 3 nightmares were Ukraine, Greece, and the Euro. And what he said about Ukraine was very interesting. Over Ukraine, I cannot recall any issue in my lifetime when the leaders of the West have got it so hopelessly wrong. We are treated to babyish comparisons of President Putin to Hitler or Stalin. And we're also told that this crisis has only been brought about by Russia's expansionism. But there was only one real trigger for this crisis: the urge of the EU continually to advance its borders and expand its own empire right into the heartland of Russia's national identity, a Europe stretching from the Atlantic to the Urals. The expansionism that was the trouble was not Putin's desire to welcome the Russians of Crimea back into the country to which they had formerly belonged, or to assist the Russians of eastern Ukraine in their determination not to be dragged by the corrupt government in Kiev they despised into the EU and NATO. It was that of an organisation, the EU, founded on the naive belief that it could somehow abolish nationalism, but which finally ran up against an ineradicable sense of nationalism that could not simply be steamrolled out of existence. We poked the bear and it responded accordingly. So that's an interesting observation. The Western press is very much against Putin, and well, we have sympathies, but Putin also has his feelings about how these countries, which are, say, Russian-speaking and Russian-leaning, the EU was trying to drag them over to the EU. He has resisted. So 2008 was that turning point, Friedman said, 2008. And that's when, say, Russia invaded two areas in Georgia, Ossetia and South Ossetia and Abkhazia in the north. And to all intents and purposes, she has remained in these two areas and has heavily reinforced the troops, Russian troops that are in these two areas. And last year, Ossetia in the north signed a treaty with Russia, and just this Thursday, can't be much more up to date than that, the South Ossetia also signed a long-term treaty with Russia, which then these two areas became, all but in name, part of Russia. So very firmly, over a matter of years, from 2008 to today, firmly establish a Russian forward post over the Caucasus Mountains, which run down the backbone, the back of Georgia. This is where there are two passing places. He has secured them so that Russian troops can come through Georgia or up through the north to the Black Sea. So that was 2008. We then had to wait till 2014 for his move into Crimea and into eastern Ukraine. At the same time, work is not finished. He also put in troops in Moldova. In Moldova, there is a small, thin strip of territory which is independent, Transnistria, and into this, written very pro-Russian. So into this narrow strip, he has rebuilt the military airbase there so that it can take big Russian planes. He has stationed 2,000 troops on the western side of Ukraine. So he's got troops in Ukraine on the eastern side and on the western side. He's also reinforcing the Navy base at Sebastopol. So he's been very active in that region of Ukraine because he sees this as an important stepping stone towards the goal of taking Turkey, which is his ultimate goal. We have seen him working in the Mediterranean, is looking for bases to replace that in Syria, and he has largely done that, but there are now naval patrols, as were in Cold War days, now patrolling the eastern Mediterranean. He's very heavily involved in Syria and also very heavily involved in Iran. Now, advanced of that is his actions to the north of Israel. And just in the past few months, he has been very active in Iranian troops because of all the problems in Iraq and in Syria. Now, Iranian troops have managed to come into the Syrian area there on the Golan Heights. and are establishing forward bases there overlooking northern Israel. And at the same time, the Hezbollah have been strengthened in Lebanon. It is said that they have 100,000 rockets capable of firing into Israel. So we can see the steps that he has been taking. Now, very interestingly, Putin revealed at the beginning of this month that he had been saying a whole year that, well, we went into Crimea because the Crimeans held a referendum and said, we want to be part of Russia, so we came to their aid. It is now revealed that, in fact, he laid the plans for the invasion of Crimea quite a long time before the referendum took place. So he has a plan, he's working to a plan. And Crimea forms an important part of that plan because that's going to be his advanced base when he wants to move forward into the next stepping stone of coming forward into Turkey on his way down into the Middle East. And even the press can see that he's got his eyes on Turkey. This is an account going back in October, but Moscow's conquest and annexation of Crimea in February has set the stage for a new Russian drive to the south. Furthermore, the Russian naval presence in the Black Sea, as well as Moscow's acquisition of new naval bases and infrastructure in this strategic region, all directly threaten Turkey, the other major local naval power of the Black Sea. So even the press can see Russia has got his eyes set upon Turkey. Read Brother Thomas, 160 years ago, that's what he said would happen. We are beginning to see it happen before our eyes. Now the world is just about to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Gallipoli campaign. 25th of April, that begins Anzac Day. Anzac is the Australian-New Zealand Army Corps. This is where the Allies, Britain, France and Australia and New Zealand, were trying to take possession of the waterway in Turkey which leads to the Bosphorus, which leads to the Black Sea. It's no good Putin building up forces in the Crimea, in the Black Sea, unless he can get his forces in and out. So long term, he has to secure this area. Well, Britain, in support of Russia, who was an ally in the First World War, thought that they would take this region, but it was not to be. The time hadn't come. And 250,000 perished in these 9 months of this Gallipoli campaign. It was a disaster. And when Russia tried to take Constantinople from the north, again, it didn't take place because the time hadn't come. In the Second World War, Turkey took a more independent role, but I just came across, this was from the Tasmanian Examiner in 1947, Russia's eyes on Turkey are saying how Russia is massing her forces to the north. Was she going to invade? Well, again, the time wasn't right. But what we are seeing today is the time is getting very ripe, and we can see those steps. So, before we look at Turkey, let's just go back to Crimea. So, Sebastopol is where the Russians have traditionally held their base. They had to pay money to the Ukrainians in the past. Now they own the whole island, and in fact they've taken over the vast majority of the Ukrainian fleet, which was also based in the region. Many of the sailors have chosen to switch sides and receive better pay under the Russians than they did under the Ukrainians. Now, last August time, Putin approved of putting in nuclear weapons into Crimea. So this was a serious step. He is busy putting in all the equipment that is needed. If we just get the thing to move on. So these Iskander missiles are capable of having nuclear warheads on them. So they're being positioned in Crimea, and of course from there you can reach the range that these missiles now have. you can reach right into Turkey and vast areas of Europe as well. It's considered one of the most advanced missile systems in the world. He's also putting in these aircraft, which again are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, the Tu-22s. The submarines and frigates are being built to come here. Recently, last November time, they launched some more frigates, which are all going to be based here. So he's putting a lot of money and effort into building this forward base. And so it's clear that tactically, if you're going to have a base there, then the next step is you have to take Turkey in order to have the free passageway in and out. Well, there was this interesting comment back in last September. The stationing of new nuclear forces on the Crimean Peninsula is both a new and menacing threat to the security of Europe. There's also a clear message from Putin that he intends to continue to violate the territorial integrity of his neighbours. So be warned. He's also, Russia, of course, is such a vast country, it's divided up into military regions, and the southern military region covers all this area to the east of Crimea and Ukraine. And again, a lot of new weaponry is being placed here. And you have to say, well, why? Well, this is, again, advanced space like Crimea is over there. Because this is the stepping stone, not only for Crimea, but Turkey lies to the south there. So we've looked at various steps there. What Russia now is working on is softening up the south. And in Turkey, in Greece, and in Cyprus. Now, Putin uses carrots and sticks. In Ukraine, it's been sticks. In these countries, it's been carrots. For eastern Ukraine, we know that the warfare still continues. There's a ceasefire at the moment, but nobody really seriously thinks it's going to last for very long. But Putin made sure that the important town of Donetsk there is secure, and what people are worried about is Russia advancing to this port down the south, which will then give them another outlet to get to Crimea. And in Stratford, just a week ago, I think it was, they had three scenarios. Putin's obviously got to build a bridge to get to Crimea. So either it'll be a land bridge like that, there's the area that they already possess, there's Mariupol there. So that's one scenario. Another is a more advanced one, that not only that, but going all the way across to link up with the troops that he's got in Transnistria, and excuse me, cutting off Kiev from their main port. The third option is to go right up to the Dnieper River, which runs up through Kiev, and take the whole of that block there. And in Stratford's estimation, that was their more likely scenario. I reckon it would take them about 2 weeks, involve about 100,000 troops to achieve that. And of course the inhabitants of this region, so that the river runs down there, 87% Russian, 82%. It's only this region here where the Russian speaking is 46%. So it is on fairly strong territory that he will have support for this, because these Russian-speaking people hate what Kiev is doing and the West. They are not attracted by that. Their natural inclination is eastward to Russia. So let's just go and look at these tracks then in Turkey and Greece and Cyprus. Interesting situation in Greece with the expected that Greece will leave the euro. It's not a sustainable membership that she has. She is too weak economically, it doesn't make sense. And though a temporary delay, sticking plaster has been put on, most commentators expect Greece to be forced out of the euro. And what after effects that will have, nobody knows. But what is so interesting is that Russia is waiting in the wings. And when the Greek election was called in January, Salaxis, one of the first things he did was to go to Moscow and cozy up to Russia. This is something which really worries the the Europeans, the EU, because Greece is an important member of the EU, and yet Greece is using her influence to turn to Russia rather than turn to the EU. They're fed up with the Euro's methods of dealing with the crisis, which has been so devastating to the economy of Greece. And so Greece is naturally drawn towards Russia. And off the southern coast of Greece here, our vast energy reserves have been likened to the North Sea equivalent of what Britain has. And of course, Greece hasn't got the money to exploit them, but Russia is very interested at the right price to help Greece develop these. And we know Greece is in the wrong leg. It shouldn't be in the EU. It's got to be drawn into the Russian leg. And so we see the beginning of this process. The angels are using circumstances, many different circumstances, to cause them to move their goal from the EU to Russia. And the headline back in February was "Greece threatens tilt to Russia and China unless Europe yields." And this is, as I say, is a great deep worry to them. Very often Greece uses its influence within the EU to stick up for Russia instead of sticking up for the EU. And then there were a couple of further headlines just a couple of weeks ago. Greece wants to be the EU link to Eurasia, and could Europe lose Greece to Russia? So we can be quite sure, under angelic hands, that will happen. We're moved into the correct leg, which is the eastern leg. So Cyprus, again, another very interesting situation, because again, energy has been found in vast amounts off the coast of Cyprus, and they haven't got much money, they're in financial difficulty. Russia has already helped them bail out, and in fact they have extended the repayment time on the loans. Now, Britain has a great problem about Cyprus being interested in Russia, because Britain has two areas here which are sovereign bases. They belong to Britain, and she isn't very happy at Cyprus's saying to Russia, if you want a new base for your ships, we'll provide it. So Russia has signed a deal with the Prime Minister back in 25th of February, allowing the Russian ships to use the bases. It's the thin end of the wedge. Once ships begin to use the base, then they can extend that and extend that. So the headline, beginning of March, Cyprus port deal gives Russian Navy alternative to Tartars in Syria. The Russian Navy's new access to ports in Cyprus is both symbolic and practical importance for Moscow. When the EU is imposing harsh sanctions, here is Russia trying to isolate. The Kremlin is clearly relishing every opportunity to draw attention to the cracks in Europe's unity. And the Cypriots acknowledge that they're very dependent upon the Russians. A lot of their business, a lot of money flows in from Russia to them. They're very dependent upon Russia. And Cyprus, like Greece, has a history of protecting Russian interests in the EU Council, and the concern in Brussels and Brussels and Washington that Moscow is trying to sow division in order to gain a free hand in the Ukraine. So what about last character, Turkey? Well, we know that Putin has to take this area because it lies the two narrow parts that the ships have to pass through to get from the Black Sea into the Aegean, into the Mediterranean. And if you've got enemy holding that, then that makes it difficult for you to go through. So it makes great sense for Russia to take control of that region, the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. Now we know Turkey is a long-time member of NATO, and she has applied to join the EU and been rebuffed many times. But Putin obviously has to be very careful with a NATO member. He can't just walk in, he has to be much more subtle about it. So he has to use his carrot approach. Well, he did it back in December, while he was in Turkey, he announced to the world that this pipeline, the South Stream, which was to go across the Black Sea and to Bulgaria and up all into Europe and supplying Russian gas to Europe, was now a dead duck. The Europeans had caused such problems and put such obstacles that Putin says, given up on that. So as an alternative, I'm going to supply that gas that I was going to supply to Europe, I'm going to supply it to Turkey. Now, there is already a blue stream which takes Russian gas into Turkey, to Ankara, and Putin said to them that he would increase the amount of gas through there, but instead of taking this going off there, he would branch down and come into this quite an industrial region, I think, of Turkey here, and take it right up to the Greek border. It's quite interesting to take it to the Greek border, because he's trying to woo Greece into the orbit of Russia. And so if he can draw Greece and Turkey into his orbit and supply them with gas, that's brilliant. And he says to the EU, well, if you want my gas, then you've got to then buy gas from the Turks, and you can do what you like with it. Because that doesn't sit very well. The EU and Turkey have got a lot of differences at the moment. And so this Trojan horse is becoming a reality. By using energy as a Trojan horse for Russia to gain a foothold in Turkey, that will make it very difficult for Turkey to get out of any agreement. And we can see it's laying the foundations for Russia to come down and take control of Turkey on his way southward. So just to my last slide, or not quite but nearly, because the time has gone and got the same problem. The changes, and we're just verbally talking about it, the changes in this region here are truly remarkable. In just a few years, Israel now is actively working with Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Kuwait, these countries, in a way which would have been impossible before. And these nations admired what Netanyahu said when he spoke to Congress and said, look, what you're doing with the agreement that you're making with Iran, this is not for the good of the region. We know how furious Obama was with Netanyahu, but these people, they know, they're experiencing, they're in the same boat. They fear Iran's having a nuclear weapon that will bring devastation. Iran's active enough in trying to get control of various places around them, but they fear a nuclear-armed Iran. And so these nations are drawn together. They settle their differences. And it's so interesting that because of the conflict between Israel and the United States is being mirrored in the conflict which America is having with Saudi Arabia and these other countries, that, I think America's influence is being pushed away. And Britain's is being sucked in. Britain has made this region, Israel is a key market, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, these countries here are key markets for Britain. And as America is being pushed out, we're going to see, I'm sure, Britain being drawn into there. And so the whole situation can change. So we can get a time of peace and safety for this region. It's past it for Europe. Europe's gone past that. But it's still got to come here when Israel can prosper working with these countries, working together. And these countries prepared to stand up against Go Coming, what are you doing against our friends, Israel? Truly remarkable change. Again, what is so interesting is to see how Saudi Arabia, the foremost country there, is increasingly becoming a trading nation because of the plummet in oil prices, which none of us could have foreseen. But Saudi Arabia gets 97% of its revenue from oil products. So as a result of these low prices, she's having to diversify. And she's diversifying by going into building ports and trading situations. So she's becoming in the spirit of Sheba and Dedan. Most remarkable. Because, there was no reason for it. She made enough money from oil. Suddenly the situation, the angels have been working so hard to change the situation. And now building a great big port here, which will be the biggest in the region for handling cargo. Saudi Arabia in the spirit of Sheba and Dedan, trading country. And of course, us, Britain, wants to help. Absolutely amazing. So we see that the situation as depicted in this cartoon in Ezekiel 38 of these countries in opposition to what is going on, that surely will come to pass. And God's purpose is being worked out. We don't know how long we have got. We know that there are still events to happen, but they can all happen after the return of the Lord Jesus. And life is a gift from God. We have no rights to it. And one day our world will change forever, just as it did for the Jews in AD 70. Jesus had warned them that your world will come to an end. And they mocked those words, but eventually it came to pass and the Jewish world disappeared. And we recognise that what we read from 2 Peter chapter 3 was primarily about what was to happen in AD 70 when the Jewish world would disappear. But we know that these words have an application in our time today. And the words that we read there in the ESV, the heavens and the earth, not the literal heavens and the earth, but political ones, the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done in it will be exposed, opened up. Brothers and sisters, we've got to face that one day our worlds are going to be opened up for full exposure to our judge. And our worlds are going to just disappear. Our possessions, our houses, our cars, our families, our brothers and sisters, we're going to stand as individuals. Our possessions will count nothing in that day. The only thing that will count in that day is what God has given us, that human brain, and what we have stored in it. And that's what we'll be taking to the judgment seat. We're going to leave everything else behind. It's irrelevant to God's plan and purpose. What is relevant to God's plan and purpose are individuals, and how individuals are reflecting in their lives glory to God. That's what God is wanting. A world which reflects glory in men and women whom He will be pleased to immortalise and to bless in that time. And so Peter said to his generation, and his words echo on to ours, since these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought ye to be in lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn. But according to His promise, we are waiting for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. So brothers and sisters, let us press on. That day must surely be near when our Master will come. The signs are growing in the east that our Master is nearly here. So I put my final one on, as I always do, the snippets. If you want to sign up to the snippets, if you'll come up. To keep up to date with all that is happening.